Hello again. I'm sorry this video is later than the other ones I've done, and those were already late to begin with. Between bachelor parties, weddings, Father's Day, surprise visits from the in-laws, and the fact that my copy of the Leviathan I ordered via Amazon didn't bother to come in the mail until Friday, I didn't really get around to reading it until just recording this until just now. Also, it's like in the upper 90s still, even though it's 11 o'clock at night, and this weather is killing us. Anyway, so this is basically about chapters 13 and 14 from Hobbes' Leviathan. It's for our monthly discussion group, Lukoff Fits. Yeah. Hobbes is a very difficult person to disagree with, given how logical he is and the mathematical way in which he proceeds from his premises. Now, I know his conclusion that he reaches, and while I agree with most of what he says, there are a few points that I can't quite agree with him on. I don't know if I'll really get into those disagreements with his conclusion this week, but I'll definitely get into it next week. In the first paragraph of chapter 13, he basically says that everyone's equal. He says that what one lacks in strength, they'll make up for in intelligence, and vice versa. In addition to that, he points out that it's pretty easy to kill someone in their sleep, regardless of how big and scary they are when they're awake. It sounds to me like Hobbes is trying to make himself feel better about getting stuffed in his locker every afternoon during junior high. I'm not sure how right Hobbes is in this assertion. Just by driving down Broadway, I can see many people who are by no means physically fit or mentally capable. Now, Hobbes can say that they had equal opportunity to develop those talents, but squandered them, as is the norm in this decadent empire of America, which sounds like a fair assessment to me. The other example I have against this all equal in mind and body idea is that some people are born retarded or crippled or both. Now, if you've ever been hugged or punched by somebody with Down syndrome, you'll attest to their ferocious strength. However, there are many debilitating genetic and environmental factors that can screw you over from the start and leaving you lacking in both the body and the mind department. For Hobbes' philosophy to work properly, I think it needs to at least take into account this subset of men. I can understand why he would either clump women and children into this description of men, or just ignore them altogether. It's kind of hard to tell which it is, but leaving out Quasimodo just isn't fair. When discussing this with my dad, I thought of the possibility of a third element, in addition to body and mind. I was thinking about calling it soul, or connectedness, or something fruity like that. Something that basically gives them an imperceptible metaphysical advantage. But after thinking about it, I realized that this theory would ultimately change nothing from the rest of Hobbes' work, and it's incredibly hard to outline at all, let alone outline within Hobbes' pre-existing framework. So I guess in the mind-body category, Quasimodo just gets ignored. And I guess I can figure that's okay, though, because the more important equalizing factor that he presented was the fact that it's easy to kill anybody in their sleep, which is fairly easy to demonstrate. Something I found funny in the next paragraph is where he says that almost everyone assumes that they're the wisest person ever, except for people who are famous or people who agree with themselves. I think this may have been projecting a little, but I also think he's right. And the reason he gives for that phenomenon is actually quite valid as far as this epistemology is concerned. Because we see how smart we are inside our own heads, whereas we see how smart someone else is by what they do or say. Our thoughts are a lot closer at hand than theirs, and so ours just naturally seem better. Later on, he uses this as an excuse for the war that takes place in the state of nature. If I think I'm the smartest person in the world, I would expect everyone to treat me as such. But if everyone else thinks that they're the smartest, so they expect me to revere them, and so everybody kills each other because of their hurt pride. If you remember last week, I explained how he says that in the state of nature, we basically have the right to do whatever we want to whomever we want. I used an example with the berry bush to illustrate that point. And with that berry example, basically, It ends with a world in which there is continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And he addresses his opponents in the next paragraph, where he basically says, if this seems odd to you, then why do you lock your doors and windows when you go to sleep? Why do you lock up your chests and drawers within your locked house? Don't you trust your own wives and kids? By locking everything up, you're accusing mankind of the same thing that I am, but you're doing it with your actions, and I'm doing it with my words. Which again, sounds like a fair accusation to me. He also says that in the state of nature there is no such thing as just and unjust, as those are terms which are applied to behavior regarding the agreement to forfeit certain rights, which is essentially how our current system of law understands the terms just and unjust. So far, this all sounds fairly valid. I had a hard time disagreeing with his premises, and I don't see any flaw in his progression from them, so I guess we gotta just keep going. So Hobbes says that reason leads people to outline certain rules to follow so as to maintain a contract and avoid a life that isn't solid. So Hobbes says that reason leads people to outline certain rules to follow so as to maintain a contract and avoid a life that is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. It is an excellent segue into chapter 14. Which deals almost exclusively with his first two rules in detail. His first rule is that every man should endeavor for peace, as that is in his best interest. In other words, the first rule of social contract is that you do social contract. And the reason is because a life in the state of nature sucks, as we outlined before. And then he gets into the transference of rights from oneself to another and the act of renouncing rights. For instance, we're going to go back to the berry patch now. I find a berry patch, and I decide that I don't want it. So if someone else finds it, they can have it, and I can't stop them because I already renounced my right to the berry patch. In the same way, if we both find it, and I transfer my right to it to you, and you get it, and I can't stop you. I think the distinction between renouncing and transferring exists solely in the mind of the one giving up the rights. The effect remains the same to everyone else involved, doesn't it? Anyway, he says that not all rights are alienable. For instance, you can't give up your right to life because there's no way for you to benefit from the peace that is granted by your death. Which, if we remember, enjoying peace is the only reason we give up anything, so it makes sense that if we're dead, we can't enjoy it. He says that allowing oneself to be injured or enslaved is essentially the same in that I can't be sure that you won't kill me with the injuries, and slavery sucks, and therefore I can't allow it. He then defines the term contract and begins applying it, but he essentially uses the term contract like any modern American does, so I'm not really going to get into it. But this next part is really telling, because he begins trying to find a way for the contract to work, even though everyone is a lying, selfish greed bag. He says that man's word is the most easily broken thing in the world, and so he tries to find a way to make people hold true to their words. And after floundering around for about a page and a half, he finds two things that'll help. Calling upon God and oaths, so as to instill the fear that he would smite me if I failed to hold up my part of the bargain. And fear of the state of nature, which again, if the state of nature results in a horrible, short, and not fun life, then it would just be natural that I would avoid it at all costs, even if it meant holding up a contract that wasn't really fair to me. So as a side note, I think that Hobbes would say that an atheist is about half as trustworthy as anyone else, and everyone else isn't trustworthy anyway. But after outlining his oaths, he basically says that oaths change nothing in the legality of the contract simply because how people behave about it. A contract is a contract, and it has to be upheld, regardless of how you promise to do it. As far as I know, that's chapters 13 and 14. I've only read the first page of 15, so I'm not going to get into it. We'll do chapter 15 next week, and we'll get into some fun subjects like abortion and the natural nature of man. But until then, keep cool, make responses, invite your friends, share my videos, and I'll see you all next week.